Tuesday, July 5th, Crucibles of Sin. Romans 1:18. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who suppress the truth in unrighteousness. Everything we do has a consequence. If you stand in the hot sun with ice cream, it will certainly melt. Cause and effect always go together. And no matter how desperately we may want things to be different, it is the same with sin. It always reaps consequences. It is not that God sits in heaven wondering what terrible thing he can do to people who sin. No, sin itself comes with its own built-in consequences. The problem is that many times we think that we can somehow outwit God and sin without experiencing the consequences. It never happens. Paul makes it very clear that sinning has consequences, not only for eternity, but also painful and distressing consequences today. Romans 1:21-32, Paul describes the process when people fall into sin and the consequences of those sins. We'll read these verses prayerfully and carefully and summarize the essence of what Paul is saying, focusing specifically on the stage of sin and its consequences. And the passage reads as such. Romans 1:21-32. For although they knew God, they neither glorified him as God nor gave thanks to him, but their thinking became futile, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Although they claimed to be wise, they became fools, and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for the images made to look like mortal man and birds and animals and reptiles. Therefore God gave them over in the sinful desires of their hearts to sexual impurity, for the degrading of their bodies with one another. They exchanged the truth of God for a lie, and worshipped and served created things rather than the Creator, who is forever praised. Amen. Because of this, God gave them over to shameful lusts. Even their women exchanged natural relations for unnatural ones. In the same way, the men also abandoned natural relations with women and were inflamed with lust for one another. Men committed indecent acts with other men and received in themselves the due penalty for their perversion. Furthermore, since they did not think it worthwhile to retain the knowledge of God, he gave them over to a depraved mind to do what ought not to be done. And they have become filled with every kind of wickedness, evil, greed, and depravity. They are full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, and malice. They are gossips, slanderers, God-haters, insolent, arrogant, and boastful. They invent ways of doing evil. They disobey their parents. They are senseless, faithless, heartless, ruthless. Although they know God's righteous decree that those who do such things deserve death, they not only continue to do these very things, but also approve of those who practice them. A couple of verses earlier, Paul describes these consequences as the wrath of God, Romans 1:18. God's wrath in this passage is simply God calling human beings to reap what they sow. Even for Christians, God does not always intervene immediately to remove the pain that results from our own actions. Many times, he allows us to experience the consequences of our actions in order for us to understand how deeply damaging and offensive our sin is. We have been considering the consequences of breaking God's moral law. But what about breaking God's health laws? Our bodies are God's home. If we abuse our bodies by failing to eat healthfully or to exercise, or if we regularly overwork, this also is sin against God. And this has consequences that can create the conditions of a crucible. In your own life, How have you reaped the immediate consequences of your own sins? What lessons have you learned? What changes must you make in order to not go through something similar again? From the book The Sanctified Life, page 76, it says, "It is no light matter to sin against God, to set the perverse will of man in opposition to the will of his Maker. It is for the best interests of men, even in this world, to obey God's commandments, and it is surely for their eternal interest to submit to God and be at peace with Him. Of all the creatures that God has made upon the earth, man alone is rebellious, yet he possesses reasoning powers to understand the claims of the divine law, and a conscience to feel the guilt of transgression and the peace and joy of obedience. God made him a free moral agent to obey or disobey. The reward of everlasting life and eternal weight of glory is promised to those who do God's will, while the threatening of His wrath hang over all who defy His law." And from the book, Our High Calling, page 44, it says, "Heaven with its attraction is before you, an eternal weight of glory, which you may lose or gain. Which shall it be? Your life and your character will testify the choice you have made. I feel the more anxious because I see so many indifferent upon the subjects of infinite importance. They are always busy here and there about matters of minor importance, and the one great subject is put out of their thoughts. They have no time to pray, no time to watch, no time to search the Scriptures. They are altogether too busy to make the necessary preparation for the future life. They cannot devote time to perfect Christian characters and in diligence to secure a title to heaven." God bless.